Let's talk about numbers in Chinese. In this video, we'll be talking about formal versus informal readings of single digits. We'll be talking about numbers for larger orders of magnitude. We'll talk about ways to express approximate numbers and when to write Arabic numerals versus Chinese characters for numbers. Now, you're probably already familiar with the single digits 0 to 9 in Chinese.
0,
零
1,
一
2,
二
3,
三
4,
四
5,
五
6,
六
7,
七
8,
八
9.
九. So for example, when we talk about there being 365 days in a year, we talk about there being 365天. And when you refer to the year 1943, you would say 1943年. Now, if you're going to Taiwan, these pronunciations are all you need to know. They will work in all situations. If you're going to mainland China, however, there is one variant that you need to be aware of, and that is that the number 1 can be pronounced yao rather than yi when reading single digits. So if you're speaking to a mainland Chinese person and you want them to call 911, you would have to ask them to 打911. If you want them to come to room 103, then you would tell them to come to 103号房. Now you might be wondering, why pronounce the number 1 as yao instead of yi? Well, the first thing to know is that variant readings of digits are common in the languages of the world. In English, for example, if you were going to room 103, we often pronounce the 0 as O. So we would say room 103 instead of 103. So replacing 0 with O is common. That's an alternate reading. And in the case of Chinese, the alternate reading yao for the number 1 yi is a military usage. It originated in the military where there's a need for clarity and disambiguation. Just as when airline pilots talk to ground control, they might say Alpha, Bravo, Charlie instead of A, B, C. In the Chinese military, there was once a practice where instead of yi for the number 1, people would say yao. Instead of for the number 2, people would say liang. Instead of qi for the number 7, people would say guai, which means a bend. Instead of jiu for the number 9, people would say gou, which means a hook. And instead of ling for 0, people would say dong, which means a hole. So for example, the police code 129 would come out as yao ya gou. 507 would be wu dong guai. Not all of these military usages trickled into civilian use, but the pronunciation yao for 1 certainly did. Now, having different pronunciations for the same number can lead to misunderstandings, of course. For example, in the book 请问101在哪里? The mainland Chinese exchange student Zhang Hao writes about trying to get directions to the most famous landmark in Taipei, Taipei 101, which was at one time the tallest building in the world. She went around asking people 101在哪里? 101for 101, but nobody knew what she was talking about because in Taiwan, people called it 101 instead of 101. I should mention also that the pronunciation yao is used only when reading out single digits, like in a phone number. It is never used when reading out a larger number. So for example, if you want to talk about there being 121 people in the room, you would say there are 121人 instead of 121人. Yao would not be used here. Speaking of larger numbers, Chinese and English both operate on a 10-based system, so things remain the same when you go from ones to tens to hundreds to thousands. And after you get above 1,000, things get a little different, because English introduces new units at the order of magnitude 3, whereas Chinese introduces new units at the order of magnitude 4. Let's look at English. So in English, when you reach 1,000, magnitude 1 is 1,000. Magnitude 2 is 10,000. Magnitude 3 is 100,000. And after magnitude 3, you get a new unit. After 100,000, you go straight to million. That is the new unit. Now with Chinese, it's different. After you reach 1,000, there is yet one more unit, and that is 1 for 10,000. So 10,000 is its own unit, 1. After you reach 1, okay, magnitude 1 is 1. Magnitude 2 is 10,000. Magnitude 3 is 100,000. And there's a magnitude 4. Magnitude 4 is 10,000. And after you reach magnitude 4 of 10,000, that is when you get the new unit introduced. The unit after 1 would be E. So English introduces new units every 10 to the third power, whereas Chinese introduces new units every 10 to the fourth power, as you can see from this chart over here. So from this chart, you can see that there are mismatches between the English units and the Chinese units when it comes to larger numbers. For example, English million comes out as 百万 in Chinese. English billion comes out as 10亿. Chinese 1 comes out as 10,000, and Chinese yi is the equivalent of 100 million. So these units are placed differently. Now, when you're dealing with larger numbers, such as when you're doing interpreting between English and Chinese, rapid conversion between these different units is necessary. So for example, when we talk about the population of the US, which is 340 million, that comes out in Chinese as 3.4亿. When you talk about the population of Taiwan, which is 23 million, in Chinese you would have to say 2,300万. With this understanding, there are some common mistakes that we need to avoid. So for example, the Chinese never say 10,000 for 10,000 because they have a unit for that, and that is 1. So they would always say 1,000 for 10,000, never 10,000. Similarly, for a number such as 1,500, in English it's common to call it 1,500, but the Chinese never say 1500. That's not an expression in Chinese, it's not a thing. In Chinese, you have to say 1,500 instead of 1500. Chinese also has a unique mechanism to express approximate numbers. You know how in English people talk about 20-somethings and 30-somethings? What's a 20-something? A 20-something is somebody that's older than 20, but younger than 30, right? And then a 30-something is somebody who is older than 30, but not yet 40. Okay, to express this kind of notion, the Chinese has a suffix 多 that you can add to a number. So if I were to say 20多人, that means there are more than 20 people, but less than 30. If I say 30多人, then that would mean there's more than 30 people, but less than 40. Okay, so 多 does exactly that. Except 多 can apply to units at all levels. So I can, for example, say 100多人, and what that means is more than 100 people, but less than 200. If I say that at a library, there are 23,000多本书, then what I'm saying is there's more than 23,000 books, but less than 24,000. Another suffix that's similar to 多 is 几, but 几 can only be added to the tens, so its usage is more limited. I can talk about there being 20几人, that is more than 20 people, but fewer than 30. Or I could talk about the temperature being 150几度. That is, the temperature is above 150 degrees, but less than 160. Finally, there are 3 different ways of writing Chinese numbers. You can write them using Arabic numerals, like this. You can write them using normal Chinese characters, like this. And then in ultra-formal situations, there's a special set of long-form characters that you could use to write the numbers, which would come out like this. Now, when do we use which one? Well, with larger numbers, typically numbers above 20, people tend to go with Arabic numerals, as you can see from this example here. With numbers that are small, typically numbers below 10, it's common to use normal Chinese characters. And then between the two, let's say numbers between 11 and 20, you see a mix of both. Sometimes Arabic numerals, sometimes Chinese characters. Now, in addition to these 2 options, in certain special situations, such as when you're writing a check, additional safeguards are needed. Consider what you do when you're writing a check in English. If you're writing a check for $198, in addition to writing 198 in the box in Arabic numerals, you're required to write the number out in full words. $198 only, let's say. Now, in Chinese, there's a similar precaution taken. If you're writing a check for $198, if you write it out in Chinese characters, 198. It is really easy to add 2 more lines to the 一 to make it a $390 check instead. Okay, so these numbers are easily altered. And to prevent that, there's a separate set of long-form characters that are not so easily altered that are used for situations like this. So instead of just 1 line for the number 1, 一, the long-form character for 1 looks like this. Instead of 2 lines for the number 2, 二, the long-form character for 二 looks like this. And instead of 3 lines for the number 三, 3, we write this character. So you get the idea. There's a whole set of long-form characters for the digits 0 to 9 to prevent alterations such as this. So on a check for 198 yuan, the number would look like this. One last thing before we finish. What do you do about 0? The answer is simple when you're using Arabic numerals, but when you're writing in Chinese characters, you have choices. In Hong Kong, the number 0 is often written out as this character ling over here. So when you're writing the year 2008, for example, you would write 2008年 in Hong Kong. In mainland Chinese and Taiwan, however, people often use a little circle instead of the character ling. So the year 2008 would look like this, 2008年. So with that, I hope you have a better understanding of how numbers are used in Chinese. I hope you understand how they're written, how they're pronounced in different parts of the world, how the units are different from English when it comes to larger numbers, and unique methods for approximation. Now, subscribe to my channel if you like this video so I can reach my modest goal of reaching 300 subscribers, 300人, which can be written like this, or like this, by the end of the year 2025. That would be 2025年, which can be written like this, or like this. I'll see you next time.